And what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to try something brand new here on my page. And that is, I'm going to be telling you some stories. I'm going to basically we're going to be recovering some of the books, some of the stories that we find in the Old Testament, and try to maybe humanize them a little bit, maybe expand our view of those stories a little bit. I guess the only other way I could say it is try to humanize them a little bit more. Now, many years ago, I attended a church, and I preached on a pretty regular basis. And one of my favorite things to do was to, as one of the sermons, would be to tell one of these stories and pull out the obvious principles and ideas that would be important for a person to walk away or to learn from those stories. And over the years, I told a number of stories. And this story in particular received probably the most positive feedback. Many people said that this story was their very favorite story in the Bible, setting aside the stories, I think, of Christ. So what I would like to do is to tell you the same story. And much in the same way that I did many years ago. Now, I'm not a theologian. I'm not a accredited pastor of any church. I'm just a guy, and I just like to tell some of these stories. So that's what we're going to do. We'll get along here as far as we can in this story, and we'll go from there. So, without any further ado, my friends, this is the story of Joseph. When I was 17 years old, I was living in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And my 14, 15, 16, 17 years, those years were not good ones. I got into quite a bit of trouble. We'll just leave it at that. I was not a very good student. Those years were pretty tough. There's a lot of times of fighting between my parents and I. It was not a good time. 17. I don't know about you, but 17 was a little tough. And then we ended up ultimately moving from Tennessee to Central Ohio, and started a brand new school and things like that. So those years were kind of weird for me, kind of difficult for me. But I don't really, when I think back to 17, I can only tell you that for myself, I was not very mature. And I don't know a lot of people who were really very mature at 17. I have a son who's 15 right now, not exactly as mature as I would hope he would be. I mean, but there are times that you'll run into somebody, a 17-year-old, and it kind of takes your breath away a little bit to run into somebody that is that mature at such a young age. Well, the story we're going to tell you today is about a boy that's 17 years old. 17. His name is Joseph. And this story comes from the book of Genesis, starting in chapter 37. I'm reading out of the New International Version, which says that Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob. And he starts off by saying, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. And this is where we start. Now, earlier in this book, we have read a little bit more about Jacob and his brother Esau, and how Jacob had deceived his father to steal a birthright. How Esau had basically said, "Yeah, I'll give you whatever. You have the birthright. Just give me the lentils. All right." So we know a little bit about Jacob, and we know that he ran from his brother for a long time. And we also know that there came a point in time when they were going to be reunited. And we know that Jacob was terrified about this. And so much so that he basically kind of like split his family up and went to meet him, just so in case he was to slaughter him, if Esau did choose to slaughter Jacob, at least his family might be able to get away. But when he got to his brother, he was not received with any kind of spirit of retaliation or anger or anything. But in that scenario, in that story of Jacob, is where we first hear about Joseph. He's in there, but we don't hear much about him. But what I'd say is this verse right here says a lot. It's one verse. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. When I was really little, probably age 3, my mom and dad divorced. And my mom went one way, my dad went another. Didn't even really have a lot of contact with my biological dad. But as years went on, my stepdad stepped in and he raised us. And for me and for my sister, he became dad for us for many, many years. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s, that I actually reached out to my real biological dad and started having a relationship with him. And it was then that I suddenly realized I had other siblings. Namely, in fact, I'm looking at a picture right now. I have one full-blooded sister, but I also have 3 step or half sisters. And so what you're seeing in this story is that scenario. You're seeing Joseph, 17, is tending flocks with his brothers. Now, you just want to stop right there and like, oh, it's his brothers. This is not like your normal brothers, okay? These are brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah. Now, if I'm not pronouncing those names, those words or those names to your liking, my apologies. You know what I mean. But that right there, that scenario is that causes some people a lot of anxiety. Think about those other brothers, and then there's this 17-year-old kid that's here. Now, Jacob really loved Joseph's mother. She was really the one that he loved the most. And he had children. He had married these other 2 women, but it was really this woman that he was really, really, truly in love with. And we're going to talk about her a little bit later as the story goes on. But what you need to understand here is this is already a really testy dynamic. And you want to know why? Because of the very next verse. The very next verse. All right. So first off, we hear that he brings him a bad report. He's there with his half brothers out there with the sheep. And then he decides he sees or hears something, and he brings his father a bad report. Listen to what this verse says. This is Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel, that is Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. Now that right there is tough enough. I'm a father of 2 handsome boys. And if ever I'm asked, who do you love more? I love them both equally. This is what any parent will tell you, is that they love their children equally. And I would imagine that Jacob perhaps tried to present it in that manner for a while. But I don't know how convincing it was. Each of you probably have children, or you have nieces or nephews. And kids are perceptive. And there's times kids will go, you love them more than you love me, blah, blah, blah. But in this story, if Jacob was trying to keep it hidden, if he was trying to seem impartial, if he was trying to not show favoritism, he failed miserably. He failed miserably. And it's also in this verse. It says, it said that it said Israel loved Joseph more than all of his sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. This is a what's the technical term? Recipe for disaster. That's what you're seeing here, is that this is already being set up in a very, very bad way. The same kind of things that you have probably either experienced in your own lives or that you've seen in your lives were happening here. There's going to probably be a great deal of jealousy between these older brothers and this young one who they see as being really doted on, who's really being shown a great deal of favoritism. And then you add to that, while they're out there working their tails off, and here's this 17-year-old boy out there with him. And I'm not saying he wasn't working hard too, but these are most likely men, some of them probably even married. If he's 17, they may have been anywhere in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. I couldn't tell you how old they were. I don't know that the Bible even tells me that. But these were men. And then one day while they're out there, all of a sudden, for some reason, Joseph decides he's going to go and basically tattle on his brothers. I don't have any brothers, only sisters, but I've seen how brothers treat each other, and I've watched my children, when one of them tattles on the other, how they kind of try to watch out for the other one, because the other one's going to put two and two together. The other son is going to be able to realize relatively quickly, how did mom and dad find out? And everyone in this group probably figured these things out too. Joseph was the one. He was the narc. He had told, and everybody knows snitches get stitches. Even in Canaan, snitches get stitches. But he told. The Bible doesn't tell us what they had done. It doesn't tell us. It just simply says that he brought his father a bad report. Now, I have nothing in the Bible to indicate to me that he was a liar, that he was going to go and tell his dad some kind of story that was untrue just to get them in trouble. And based upon the story, when I see how these brothers ultimately behave, I'm probably led to believe that they were not of the highest moral character, which says I'm ultimately probably led to believe that there really was something they had done. And Joseph felt strongly enough about it that he went and told his father what it was. And this did not help him. I mean, think about this line. They hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. This is not saying that they would not. It's saying that they could not. I don't know about you, but there have been people I've met in my life that I've allowed to be very close to me that have hurt me or hurt the ones I love. And I understand that. And sometimes, if it's only by the grace of God that you can speak a kind word to them. If you do, it's not because of anything that you've mustered up. It's because of God's grace that you can speak a kind word to them. But these guys hated him so much they could not speak a kind word to him. I mean, here he is. He's walking around with this coat. It's different than every coat that they wear. And that leads me to even think about, being out there in the field with sheep. Is this even a practical coat? We think of it as a robe or a coat of many colors. We'll see. We'll see what the Bible says about that. But the point I want to make is it would almost be as if you're going to be heading out into, you're going to go change your oil in your car, and you're going to wear that Gucci jacket that you just wore, or Dolce and Gabbana, or whatever the fashion currently is. You're going to wear that while you crawl underneath a cart. It would not make any sense. But there he was, wearing that jacket and tattling on him. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is not a good start. So that's a little bit of the story. That's the introduction. It's only been about 15 minutes. But what I'd like to do is go ahead and just kind of break this